Yeah, you've been able to hear my needs and I've been able to hear your needs, and then we've been able to negotiate from each of our positions to create solutions that work for both of us. Some people struggle when there's a conflict, and I teach this in conflict resolution when I'm working with couples, is that usually if there's a conflict and one person wants something one way and the other person wants it another way, they get stuck and they think that there's only two ways, and so they're going to fight and defend for their way. So then they're going to become righteous and want to dominate the other person, when really the solution quite often is neither. It's like some other possibility, but because you're so fixated on your way as being the right way, you enter into this fight, into this combat with your partner. In today's episode, I'm joined by my life partner and my beloved, Bek Isaia, and we decided to have this episode to talk about our relationship because we believe we do relationship quite well, and we wanted to demonstrate how we go about that, how we do that, what we've learnt from each other about how to show up in a relationship. And so we share some of our journey, how we met, how we came together, the struggles we had in the beginning, the different things that we brought to relationship that wasn't working and how we navigated and managed those things, and how we went from wanting to be both childless to now starting a family and what that journey looked like, and the different things we've learnt from each other along the way. And so the whole idea was to showcase what an amazing and exquisite relationship can be like. So if that's something you're interested in, have a listen. I think you'll enjoy it. Welcome, Bek Isaia.
Hi there.
Hi, darling.
Hi. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, this is our second time sitting together.
Yeah.
So the reason we chose to have today's episode is that we believe we do relationship pretty well, and I think we both agree on that. And as a counsellor and coach, I work with couples who are struggling in their relationship. And so I thought that maybe we could together unpack the different things that we bring to relationship that might be helpful to our audience, and where they can maybe improve where they're struggling in their relationship. Yep. So that was the idea.
Yep.
And a couple of things I want to say before we get going is that, first of all, I just want to let the audience know that you are 8 months pregnant, and that you're really going through, the challenges of that.
Yeah. Yep.
It's a bit of a mission, and you're feeling a bit uncomfortable today.
Yeah, a little unwell.
Yeah, okay. But we're going to struggle through it.
We're going to power on anyway.
Okay, fantastic.
Yep.
And then the other thing I wanted to start with is that before we met, and we'll go into how we met, but before we met, I was already working as a counsellor and coach with couples.
Yeah.
And I was reasonably successful in working with couples as a relationship coach, and I think my clients generally got a lot out of my work. Mm-hmm. And then what I've realised in the last 4 years that we've been together is that I've probably learnt more about relationships in the last 4 years than I have in the last 58 years before that. So I just want to acknowledge you for really bringing a deeper level of understanding and knowledge about how to do relationship well. So I see you as my relationship coach.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And we'll look at what I've learnt from, or I tend to defer to you when it comes to our relationship, because I trust that instinctively and intuitively that you're going to guide this relationship, and you've done that from the beginning. And we do have quite an exquisite and very satisfying relationship that works on all levels. And so I just thought maybe we can start with how we met.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And so I'll give my version of it, and then I'll throw it over to you,
okay.
And you can add your bit. So
okay.
Because we met in somewhat unusual circumstances, and I've been a nurse, a counsellor, a coach for 30 years, and there's a rule that you don't fraternise with your clients or patients. And for 30 years I kept that rule. I had a lot of integrity around that, and there's good reasons for that. Mm-hmm. And then we met. You came to me because you were looking for some counselling or coaching, and
yeah,
it was more kind of trauma.
Guidance and trauma work, and it was through a friend of ours.
Yeah, So you were referred to me through
Yeah.
through a mutual friend.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And so, but when you first came to see me, you came as a client, and so normally I wouldn't have a romantic interest in a client, but as it's turned out, that this was the first time I've broken that rule, but I'm glad I did. And so there's rules and reasons why if you're in a relationship where one person is like a practitioner or clinician and the other one's a patient or client, there can be a power dynamic there that shouldn't, it's why they recommend you don't date people under those circumstances. And I was very mindful of that. But yet there was still this attraction between us that eventually we did acknowledge, and we thought about it long and hard about the implications of pursuing a romantic relationship. And I think we did it quite responsibly, because I felt like it was a no-go zone, and then you were like, well, maybe it is a go zone. And I'm like, well, how do we make that work? Luckily at the time I had a clinical supervisor, a psychologist, who I sought his advice and sat with him in a few sessions, and he said, look, it's not a absolute deal breaker. It can be done providing it's managed responsibly, and that you're looking out for any, projection or transference or countertransference, these kind of clinical terms that could demonstrate that there might be an unhealthy dynamic at the unconscious level. And so we were both conscious that if we were going to go ahead, we had to make sure there was none of that going on. So for me, I was a bit reluctant at first, and but now that we're in a beautiful, committed relationship and starting a family, I'm so glad we went down this path rather than me saying, no, I can't do this. So yeah, what's your version of
Well, I think it's
things?
also important to note that when I came to you, it was somewhat early on in the COVID time, and I guess that kind of threw a major spanner in the works for me in my life. I was planning on going back to America right as all the international borders closed, and so I was in New Zealand at the time, on my way to the US, and I had like 24 hours to decide like what to do. Do I go on to the US, or do I come back to Australia for 2 weeks? And so I chose to come back to Australia, and then obviously it went on a lot longer, and I wasn't really able to get back to America. So I really struggled at first. Like, I had this idea that America was my future, and where I was in my career, like Australia was so far behind. I didn't really feel like I had a place career-wise to go on here. And so I felt really stuck, and I was angry and confused. And so I actually kind of came to you to work through some of that stuff. It's not like I was coming to you because I had, major issues in my life. I'd already worked through a lot of that stuff already. Don't get me wrong, like certainly over the years I've continued to do a lot of work on my personal stuff. But the main reason why I was coming to you is because I was confused and angry and pissed off with the world, and just didn't really know what my next steps were. So yeah, that's I think an important thing to note, is that I wasn't coming to you because I, had depression or, major issues to really work through, like personal sort of stuff. So you weren't really my therapist. So I think that's sort of something really important to note, that there wasn't, I didn't ever feel like there was a power dynamic between us. But yeah, when we did meet, it felt instant, like that there was an instant connection, or there was a curiosity, and we just started spending time together, just hanging out, and it was kind of undeniable that there was something really there. That we had a lot of things in common, and but it was also very confusing for me because there was an age difference, and that was. I would sit there and I'd scratch my head and be like, "What? This is not what I was expecting." You know, to sort of meet somebody who I had so much in common with, where there is such an age difference. So yeah, that was certainly more what I had to work through. You had to work through I'm a clinician and this person's come to me as a a client.
Yep.
I had to work through the confusion of of someone being so much older than me.
Yes.
But yeah, I think we both worked through those things, and we communicated about those things very openly.
Yeah, we did. We do have exquisite communication. I think that's one of the things we have going for us. And so just for the audience sake, I'm 62 and you're 37, and so some simple arithmetic will tell you what the age difference is. And
I think you just turned 58 or 59 when we met.
Okay. Probably 58 because we've been together 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a 25-year age difference, and that's quite significant. It's a number, and it's interesting because neither of us has really felt the significance of that number, even though, if you look at it, it's a generation. And, there may be people that have ideas around that, but, for us in-house, it's never really been an issue other than for you in the beginning it was like, is this a problem? Should I be aware of things? And for me, in the same way that maybe there was some projection, I also noticed the age difference as well. And interestingly, I think what was going on for me subconsciously without even knowing it, so I before I'd met you, I'd, always single, never married, no children, 58, like what's going on? And I think I developed quite late in life. I matured quite late. I've got my reasons for that based on my family of origin stuff. And so I'd been attracted to younger women, and I think the reason why, unconsciously I was still holding out for the possibility of family. So I was more attracted to women of childbearing age rather than my own age. So I think that had something to do with it. But I didn't know I wanted kids. And neither of us, when we met, we were like, no, and you're like, you're a no. I'm like, well, okay, that's good. We can maybe hang out because if you wanted kids and I didn't, that wasn't going to work, or vice versa. So for the first 3 years of our relationship, we were both a no to children. That's changed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Which we're both, quite grateful for.
Oh, delighted. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy that it's turned out this way, but a month from now we'll be a family, and we're both really excited and looking forward to that. How did we get here? So we've started a little bit at the beginning, and so I got some supervision from my clinical supervisor. I worked through my doubts around the age difference, and also around was there any transference. So what transference is in a clinical or therapeutic setting is when maybe some dynamic or unresolved conflict or trauma in the client may be projected onto the practitioner. Particularly you being younger, you could have looked at me as a father complex and maybe projected or transferred some of that unresolved stuff you might have had with your father onto me.
I definitely had to look at that as well.
Yes, because you did have some unresolved. Not much, but there was some questions. We won't go into that too much. Yeah. So we had to make sure that there wasn't an unhealthy transference. And then if you were to transfer that projection onto me and I was unaware of it, there's a thing called countertransference, where then I then go into the father role and then start relating to you like a daughter. And that's not going to work. And so I think being aware of that was important for me. And in my training, you're trained to look out for that. And, I was asking you, is that an issue for you? And you were like very clear that you weren't projecting any father thing onto me. And I certainly wasn't looking at you in any kind of complex like that. But I also wanted a second set of eyes on it. And that's why I went to my clinical supervisor. And over time it became clear. And we took it slowly. Yeah. We didn't rush in. We wanted to make sure that this was a healthy relating dynamic. And I think it took probably 6 to 9 months before we
really
committed to moving forward in relationship.
Yeah.
So I guess it's because it's frowned upon in professional circles. I feel like I'm outing myself, sharing this part of how we met.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's also an example of that it's not 100%, no, that it can be done responsibly. And I think we're a success story of how that can be done that way.
I think it was throughout that time when we were kind of figuring out what we were, I know that you brought up that in relationship you tended to be a rescuer and that you also like to coach your partners. And I remember my immediate response was, I don't need to be rescued and I certainly don't want to be coached. And we made an agreement that you wouldn't do those things. And I think I tended to be a bit of a rescuer in my relationship as well. So I think we kind of both made this agreement that we weren't going to do the things that we had done in our past relationships. But the number one thing was that you didn't coach me. And so we actually made an agreement that you wouldn't coach me. I think it probably took you about 6 to 12 months to not do that. I had to pull you up on that quite a few times. So I think that was also interesting, is that, we also committed to not doing the patterns that we'd brought into other relationships into this one.
Yeah, I've certainly been a rescuer in the past, and I've worked through that, and that wasn't the case with you, but there was still some of that coaching. In previous relationships, I think, I feel sorry for some of my earlier partners where I thought I was all sorted and had it all together, and that, if I just coached them into being the best version of themselves, we would have a good relationship. That was just ignorance, really, on my part. And interestingly, because while we made the agreement that I wouldn't coach you, we didn't agree that you wouldn't coach me.
That's right.
And that's worked in our favour because you've coached me the whole time in how to show up in relationship.
Yeah, because you'd always had shorter relationships. I think your longest had been 3 years.
Yeah.
And you'd had like maybe 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah.
My longest had been 8 years. My first relationship had been 8 years. Wonderful relationship. Still in communication with that person, still very close to them, love them dearly. My second one was 2 years. And the only reason why that really ended was because I had to come home to Australia from America. Otherwise, I would imagine it probably would have gone longer. I'd probably had more experience in long-term relationships than what even you had.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Is that where you learnt to do relationship, in relationship, or do you think you always kind of had an understanding?
Oh, no, I definitely learnt how to be in a relationship by being in relationship because I had no positive role models in my childhood. Yeah. I never saw certainly between my parents, there was no, good role modelling around how to do relationship. So, I think I definitely learnt how to be in a relationship by being in a relationship.
Well, yeah, you learnt well, and you're a very quick and fast and competent learner. I've said several times to you that I see myself as a bit of a slow learner in some regards, particularly in relationship, because it took me to 58 to be able to show up in relationship and commit.
And even then I remember maybe a year and a half, 2 years into our relationship, and I remember you saying that you had no intention on ever living with your partner, with your, even a long-term partner. I still remember being in the car being just thinking to myself, oh yeah, we'll see about that.
Yeah.
And because that's not at all, even though I didn't want to have a family or, children, I still considered that living with my partner, that was family. And that was what I was really looking for, was to live with my long-term partner. It didn't make sense to me to live separately, but you really had that. There was you weren't particularly sure on that.
Yeah.
You had a lot of independence. You wanted your independence, and
I was really negatively affected by my childhood experience, witnessing growing up in a family of 7 siblings, and both my parents drank too much, and there was a lot of violence in the home, and remember from a young age thinking, oh, look, if this is marriage and children, I don't want a bar of it. And I made that decision quite young, and then I stuck with that for most of my life. I just thought, no, I'm not going to commit to someone. I don't want to be all in. Yeah. I don't want to have children because my experience just showed that wasn't the way to go. Right up until, 58, and I'm still like, no, I'm not committing. Yeah. And no, I'm not going there. So, I've also done a lot of work on myself, a lot of therapy and coaching work and meditation, introspection, psychedelics and shadow work, and particularly the shadow work really helped me to start look at some of the hidden parts of myself, some of the aspects of myself that I was denying or suppressing. And I'd started my shadow work before I met you. And so within this relationship, all the things about me that I was hiding from myself started to show up.
Yeah.
And you were quick to pick up on them and point them out to me, which I'm really grateful for.
Yeah.
And so...
hopefully gently.
Yeah. Well, in the beginning it was... I do remember one time, I'll share this story. I remember the time we were sitting together having a conversation. I forget what was going on, but you started coming at me pretty hot. It's pretty strong. I'm like, oh, what's going on here? I'm feeling attacked. And I, because I'd studied social styles, I was aware that, my character's being attacked here. And I'd picked you for an expressive in the social styles. And so I remember saying to you, look, it's not going to work for me or our relationship if you attack my character for no reason. What's going on? Like, are you feeling stressed about something? And then you had been feeling stressed about something, and we started talking about what you were stressed about. And then you recognised that, when you're stressed, you can go on the attack. Yeah. In the same way that when I'm stressed, I tend to want to give up. And we'll talk about that aspect of me in a little while. So yeah, you were always gentle in pointing out my blind spots to me, and I'm very grateful for that. There was just that one time where I was feeling like it was a personal attack.
Yeah.
But we were able to get through that quite quickly, and I've never felt attacked by you since.
Yeah, I think that's a specific occasion, because I do remember it. It helped me really realise, because I think you even pointed out, like, how I could be combative, defensive, righteous. And whilst I didn't like hearing those things, in that moment, on that day after that conversation, I remember like reflecting back on that, being like, oh, yeah, I am all of those. Or I can be all of those things. Yeah. And I have been that in most of my previous two relationships. So I guess you in quite a gentle but very firm way pointed those things out to me and had been the first one to have actually done that. Whereas in my my previous two relationships, though I guess those things came up, but they never knew how to actually articulate to me what I was doing or how I was being.
Yeah.
Whereas you really just, nailed it straight away and you brought it up with me and I was like, oh, yeah, I am. I can be.
Yeah. And so you were able to see how you were being and take ownership and responsibility of it and say, well, okay, yeah, it's not going to work if I attack his character when I'm stressed.
Yeah. And whilst it still took, because again, I'd been that way for 30 whatever years or whatever. And I guess I had learnt to be those ways because of, my childhood. So it still took me some time to continue to recognize and pull myself up on it afterwards. It's not like it just suddenly disappeared just because I owned up to it and admitted it to myself and to you. It still took me some time.
Yeah, I like the way Jordan Peterson articulates this particular dynamic in a couple. He refers to his wife, Tammy, as his beneficial adversary, which kind of translates to friendly enemy.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I think I see that dynamic in us, and I think it's a healthy dynamic where, and what I mean by that is that if I care about you, and I do, and you care about me, then we want each other to be the best version of ourselves. And so if we're showing up as a second-rate version, in other words, like our blind spots are at play and we can't see them, then one of the roles we play for each other is to point out each other's blind spots. Now, generally, we don't want to see the things about ourselves that we don't like, so we won't see them. And then when our partner points them out, I know initially with you I was very defensive when you were pointing out certain ways that I could be, and I didn't want to see it and own it. And I was already familiar with shadow work, and these were bits of my shadow I wasn't ready to see. But, you know, you persisted, and over time you were also pointing out to me how I could be. I could be defensive, dismissive, selfish, controlling, manipulative. I'd want to run away when we would have arguments. And I couldn't see those things. I was wanting to pretend that there was a problem over there with you, not something going on with me. So I think one of those things that we've learnt to do and do well, and look, I recommend this to couples who are struggling, and I do this in my shadow work program, is I have couples sit down to do an exercise where they allow each other to point out each other's blind spots. Now, my blind spot is something I can't see about myself, but you can see. And your blind spots is something you can't see about yourself that I can see. And we've naturally fallen into that. So while we're not coaching each other, we do have this consent and willingness and desire to point out where each of us could show up better by identifying how we're being. And so when I...
Is that the strategy thing that you do?
No, that's a little that's a little different. Yeah.
Because that's also really, was very beneficial, certainly for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so so it's really worked for us so when you point out my blind spot, you're attempting to communicate to me there's something I'm not seeing about myself, that if I could see it, then how I'm being and how it's not working for a relationship, if I can catch that and own it and take responsibility for it, I can then transform that part of myself. So rather than show up as manipulative or controlling, if I catch myself being that way, if I can see it, I can do something about it. But if I'm being controlling and you're pointing that out and I'm getting defensive and not owning that, then we're not going to progress in the relationship. So I've since owned, while being in relationship with you, I'd never done this before in any of my previous relationships, I'd looked at and owned and taken responsibility for being selfish, which I'd never seen before, controlling, manipulative. What are some of the other ones? Defensive, dismissive, withdrawing. And so having identified those aspects of myself and seeing how they get in the way of a relationship, I now catch them and I'm in choice, and I choose not to be those ways most of the time. Yeah. And if I do fall into an old habit of bringing it up, we're pretty quick to identify it and move on. So I think that's really served us well in our relationship.
Yeah.
One of the other things I think that we do really well is our communication.
And we get people acknowledging and complimenting us on our communication quite frequently.
Yeah, one of our dear friends who's a clinical psychologist was visiting on the weekend. Do you remember what she said? She did compliment us on our communication, or the way we address each other, or the way we respond to others. And she thought it was quite exquisite. I was completely unaware of how I was being or what I was doing, but she commented that it was something that's quite rare. And she's somewhat of a relationship expert and professional. Maybe we'll have her on one time and she can unpack it. But I think, what do you think? How would you describe our communication?
It's definitely something I've never experienced before in literally any other relationship, whether it be a previous intimate relationship or even a friendship. What we have is something that is, I think, quite unique. How we can communicate and address each other. I find it really empowering, actually.
Yeah.
How we do communicate.
I think one of the things, I think we were stuck there for a little while, and we went and saw a therapist to get a bit of help through this. And what was going on at that time, and the way I looked at it, was that we were both stressed. And when I think what was going on, because we were both stressed, each of us need to be heard, but each of us was left with the experience of not being heard, and neither of us could be the first to concede, because we both wanted to be heard at the same time.
Yeah.
And so going and having that session, having a third party in the room moderating that conversation, we both got to have the experience of being heard, and we couldn't get there on our own. Mm-hmm. And I think since then, that dynamic has shifted, whereas now I think that, and there's definitely evidence of it, you know, because since then we've had conversations where we have been able to hear each other, even though there's a bit of stress in the room.
Yeah. And
so we've learnt to, I guess, so when you're stressed, right, so if you're in a fight with your partner, one of the things that's going on is your amygdala and your hippocampus, your threat detection center in your brain is in alarm, because it's like there's a threat and you're going to fight or flight. You know, you either fight or run or freeze. And so when that's happening, it kind of shuts down your prefrontal cortex and Broca's area, the speech area, and so you find it hard to think and speak. So then you're not in a good state to have a meaningful conversation.
Yeah. I know when we first got into a relationship, I actually had a big problem with my Broca's area shutting off when I was stressed. And we had a lot of conversations around that, because when there was a stressful thing that came up, which wasn't particularly often, but I guess as like in the early days when we were figuring out that communication and how we related, that's immediately what would happen. And that was me going back into, I guess, what I'd learned as a child. But now I don't find that to be the case anymore. I think I definitely felt like, I guess our communication has empowered me that doesn't shut down anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, I think early on in the relationship, because of my tendency to want to flee, probably you didn't feel safe if we got into an argument.
Yeah. And
so when you're not feeling safe, because I'm like, oh, I'm out of here if there's going to be another argument, then you're already amygdala hijacked, because you feel threatened, and then you can't really find the words. Mm-hmm. Once I committed to the relationship, I think
that significantly changed.
Yeah, and it was the first time in my life at 59 that I committed to one woman over all others, and so it took me a long time to get there. My mum was trying to tell me all my life that I had a problem with commitment, and of course I just denied it. But I've always had a problem with commitment until 3 years ago. And so once I committed to the relationship, I think
there was that safety for me.
You started to feel safe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I remember that conversation, that argument where we actually needed to go and, I think it's this one, like when we went and saw a therapist, and it was just for one session, but it was hilarious because the thing that we were going to talk to him about was like we couldn't have an agreement over the color of the towels
in the bathroom.
in the bathroom. and you felt like I was walking over you, and there was this dynamic playing out, and obviously there was something underneath that, but they were the ridiculous things that we couldn't, all the big things could come up and we could work through them all, but something as small as the color of the towels in the bathroom was the issue. And then I think the other one, the other big thing that's come up in our relationship, where we worked through it in such a different way, was, and I know that you've spoken about it recently, or on one of the podcasts, I think it was with Andrew Campbell, was about the respect. You didn't feel respected? Is that?
I didn't experience being. It wasn't so much a feeling. I was feeling agitated.
Yeah.
And the reason, I didn't know why I was agitated, but I was agitated for a good month.
Yeah. And you even had like a pain come
I was having physiological complaints.
Yeah.
And this was when it was the first trimester of your pregnancy.
It was, yeah.
And so
it was a very difficult time.
You had the most uncomfortable first trimester, and that you had hyperemesis, like vomiting a lot, nausea. You were tired. You couldn't really do anything except kind of sleep and throw up. And it was really challenging for you. And I had to pick up my game, and because you couldn't really function, and so all of a sudden I had to do all the work around the house and all the cooking and cleaning and laundry, and I mean I was already doing a
as
share
well
of
as
that.
working 6 days a week.
Yeah, working 6 days a week, and so I started to feel definitely the stress of that increased workload. Plus, you'd stopped earning, so then there was more pressure on me to be the income earner. And so I was feeling stressed, but also I knew that my role was to fill the gap where you obviously couldn't, and so I knew I had to do it. And I didn't resent having to do it. It had nothing to do with that, really. It was more that I just was starting to feel agitated, and like you said, I started to develop these physical complaints of pain that I couldn't explain.
In extreme pain.
Yeah. And
you went to see our dear friend, Dr. Vanessa Strauss, and I think you were getting some acupuncture, but, it's never just acupuncture with Vanessa. And so, you guys were just talking, and I remember you came home and it was like late at, in the evening, and you opened the door, and I immediately felt like your frustration or something. You brought in something with you, and I was on the couch, and I was like, "Oh, is everything all right?" And you were in the fridge, and you're like, "No, actually, there's something I want to talk about, and but I just don't think you're going to hear me." And I was like, and I guess pregnancy has changed me significantly. It's definitely brought me into my feminine. It's made me so much softer, despite the difficulty of the sickness and things like that. I remember saying to you, I don't even have the energy to argue anymore. I honestly just felt softer inside. So I was like, okay, well, you're right, I'm not going to hear you if you come at me with you're not going to hear me. If you're telling me that I'm not going to, well then, yeah, you're right, I'm not going to. And I immediately felt myself get defensive, but at the same time was actually able to articulate that in a soft, gentle way. And so when I said that, I was like, okay, well, if you change your attitude coming into having wanting to bring this up with me, I'll commit to not being defensive, listening to it. And so you pulled up a chair, and you still came at me with some, for lack of a better word, aggression, but it definitely wasn't. And I just sat there and I just listened to you as you told me that, how you felt about that need to be respected.
Yeah, so what I think there's two things that probably came into it. One was you've definitely softened with pregnancy. Early in our relationship, you were quite combative and feisty and had quite masculine traits.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then coming pregnancy, definitely you became more feminine, soft and receptive, which is great. But then the other thing that when you got pregnant, we made a pact and an agreement that we weren't going to have any arguments because we didn't want you to be in stress while pregnant. And we've managed to keep that. And this was the closest we got to an argument.
Yeah.
And I knew that I'd made this agreement not to cause stress for you. So I was definitely agitated after that treatment with Vanessa because what was starting to rise was was what was going on inside of me.
Yeah, you were able to put your finger on it.
Yeah.
Whereas before you couldn't.
Correct.
Before you had that.
And then I knew what I needed to talk with you about, but I also was aware that I had a head full of steam and that I suspected that you were going to be defensive and not be able to hear it. But then you handled it well because without you being combative and feisty, you softened. And I thought, okay, great, you are open to hearing this if I can soften my tone. So I worked hard to soften my tone, and I sat down and, lowered my voice and all the rest of it. And we got to a point where I was able to communicate to you what was behind my agitation. And what it was that all the extra stuff I was doing on top of working 6 days a week, and I work quite long hours, and then I was doing all this other stuff, and we live on acreage, and I've got to do all the outside work, and now I had to do all the inside work as well. And so I was doing everything, and for me, the missing piece for me was that I wasn't feeling acknowledged or recognised for my contribution.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that I even needed to be until I was just so deeply agitated and worked up and in pain that it highlighted I need to say something. And I did need to say this. And so, and I guess the word respect is close enough to what I was looking for. And, you know, my idea of respect is being seen for who I am, and not necessarily for who I am, but for my contribution. I wanted to be seen and acknowledged for my contribution because I was stepping up, you know, and doing more. And I was wanting for you to acknowledge that and see that in me and to appreciate that. And so because you're sick and unwell, it's unlikely that you're necessarily going to see that. And then I remember saying, I just want you to communicate to me that you respect all the stuff that I'm bringing to the table. And then what happened to you when I mentioned that I wanted you to be able to communicate that you respect me?
Well, I remember saying to you, can you give me an example of what it is that you want me to say?
Right.
And I recorded it. You were like, okay. And like, so, you know, I recorded it. It was like, you went on this like 5 or 10 minute thing about all the things that you wanted me to tell you and how you wanted me to say it. And you finished and I was like, I don't even like know how to say that in my own words because you wanted me to say it in my own words. I realized immediately that I didn't have the words or know how to say it because I had never been shown that. I'd never had role models or my parents never role modeled that to me. Still to this day, there is no respect between them, you know. So, I was like, I don't. This is so foreign to me, you know. I didn't have any words or any knowledge, anything. So I couldn't give you something. I was like, if you really want me to say it, like I'm literally just going to be parroting the words that you have. Like I just need a few days to really reflect on this and figure out, you know, what or how to say it. And I know you had also come to me because you were saying like my highest value is, you know, needing or
one of my needs was my highest
need.
need.
Your highest need, of course, was respect. And you said, you know, yours is becoming a mother and doing all these things. And I was like, no, actually that's like, it was like neither one of us actually knew what our highest needs were. And so I asked for a few days for me to just like, I'm like, totally heard you. I just need a few, and I recognize, I acknowledge to you that it's like, this is foreign to me. This is completely new. I've never seen my mother give respect to my father or I guess really any man really. So yeah, I just asked for a few days, but in that time I also recognized, well, I knew, but I knew it wasn't the right time to bring it up right as you, because that was your turn, your time to bring your concerns to me. So even though it was immediately in my mind that it's like, oh, he doesn't even know what my highest need is, it wasn't the time for me to say, yeah, but you don't do it, you know. So I asked for a few days just to think about things and also called a friend who, a dear friend who is a clinical psychologist. So it's great that we have a lot of clinical psychologist friends. And I just needed to talk it out with him. And I said, like, Pete thinks my highest need is becoming a mother, but my highest need is actually safety, security, and protection. And again, once I spoke it out to someone, I knew that then I could actually like bring that to you. So then a few days later we had that conversation around, you know, I was actually able to bring it up with you that, hey, we're not, when we don't even understand what each other's needs are, you know. So I think that was really, really helpful when I was actually able to bring that up as well. Like, was it helpful for you to?
Yeah, that really, absolutely, that was a turning point. And I remember even before that, before we had that breakdown in communication, I remember I was restless one night in the bed and couldn't understand why I couldn't get to sleep. And I'd had a few nights of restlessness. And I'm like, why am I not sleeping? Why am I not sleeping? Oh, I don't feel safe. I'm like, why don't I feel safe? Well, none of the doors are locked. You know, we live in a rural area, and I don't even have a flashlight. If there was an intruder in early hours of the morning in the house, I don't even have something to fight them off with, and they could totally come in. I'm like, oh, that's why I can't sleep. I don't feel safe. I'm like, if I don't feel safe, obviously you wouldn't be feeling safe. You're sleeping next to me. I'm like, oh, I'm not doing my manly thing of protecting my environment. And the next day I went out and bought a baseball bat and a big flashlight and got some timbers to put behind the doors so the doors would lock. And then I was able to sleep because I knew that I was doing what I could to provide protection for us and our home. And now we have it so that we can lock the home at night. I've got a big stick under the bed. I've got a flashlight. I feel way more prepared to deal with any threats to me, you, and, you know, baby on the way. Instinctively or intuitively, I knew that my role was to provide protection and safety and security. But then when you mentioned that that's your highest need, I'm like, well, that makes sense, because now, you know, that you're pregnant, having a baby, you know, a woman and a baby are vulnerable during that time. And I imagine this is how we've evolved, that the man's role is, while the woman's vulnerable, is to provide that level of protection and safety and security. And so I was able to hear that's what you need. And I thought, okay, well, if that's your highest need, I'm going to do what I can to provide that to the best of my ability. And I think I've been upholding that. And some of the security is around, now that you're not earning, like I've had to pick up my game in terms of my, you know, I'm going to got three people to think about now instead of just myself. And so, you know, I'm ramping up and finding a few more gears in my business so that I'm able to provide for our family. It was, you know, for 58 years it was just me I had to think about. And so now I've think, okay, I've got to think about family. I need to lift my game. And so I've been happy and willing to do that. Then I realised that my highest need as a man was to be respected, and by that I mean to be seen for the contribution that I am, like for what I bring, because I'm mission driven or purpose driven, and so I bring something to the table, whether it's my skill set or my ability to stand up, my risk taking, my ability to confront things, and so my ability to provide and do all the extra stuff, and my contribution to you, my contribution to our family, my contribution to the community, my contribution to the world. Like, these are kind of layers of contribution, and that's just the way I'm wired. I don't know if all men are wired this way, but it definitely has changed my thinking, and I believe that may be a high need for many men.
I think so. Just like I think it's a high need for many women, that safety, security and protection is something that they need.
Yeah.
Whether they acknowledge it or not, there's, you know, a lot of feminists out there that, you know, I don't need a man and I can do all the things. And I guess I was probably raised that way. You know, I was raised by my mother, and I know I have mentioned to you before is that from a very young age, I had to provide my own safety and protection.
Yes.
Spent a lot of time at home by myself as a child. And, you know, so there was certainly no masculine man to protect me. And a lot of the time my mum wasn't even there. So I had to provide that for myself. So there was actually like quite a long time, well, for most of my adult life, I couldn't even articulate what it was what my highest need was, because I was actually providing it for myself anyway. But certainly once I became pregnant, like all of that changed. And so I'm actually really grateful that you actually came at me with that conversation around like your need for respect, because it actually helped me articulate and really like knuckle down into what mine was. And it actually came to me immediately, like I said, but I knew it wasn't the time to bring it up, because it's not about, hey, you coming at me saying, I'm not getting the respect that I am needing. And then for me to turn around and go, yeah, but you're not giving me the, my needs either,
Yes.
So that it just wasn't the time. And I could recognize that. And so we allowed some days to go, so we could sort of, I made an agreement to you that I would really sit down and consider and like think about the respect thing and how to articulate to you that respect. And I remember writing down a list of all the things that I did respect about you. And so a few days later, I was actually able to read that to you.
Yes.
And so it still wasn't me saying, hey, I respect you. And I think you said, I don't need you to actually say those words to me. But I was actually able to then like read you off a list of all the things that I did respect about you. And in that conversation, that's when I could say, by the way, like these are my highest needs.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think when you told me that you needed to be protected and safe and secure, that was good for me to hear, because I think it helped me to step deeper into my masculine frame of being that strong protector. And, as I'm aging, I'm not 25 anymore. So I need to, be in the gym. And, I am in the gym, 4 days a week. And I need to be fit and strong and healthy. I've got a baby on the way, and I need to be able to stand up and protect and all that. And I do have that in me. And this is the other thing. Before I did my shadow work, I was quite a pacifist. Like I didn't believe there was evil in the world. I just thought there was conscious people and unconscious people. And so there was no aggression in me. There was no ability to stand up to aggression. I was easily exploited. I was a bit of a pushover. And through doing the shadow work, I was able to identify that I got a monster in me. And that monster's there to come out if ever it's needed to protect. And so I feel capable and willing to face, like a couple of times we've had a noise outside at night and you've woken me up and there's something out. I just jump out of bed and go out there with my stick and my flashlight ready to confront whatever. I don't care what's out there. Yeah. I'm going out there to face it.
There's even been a person that's
yeah, we had a person show up one night and run off. And yeah, that's right. I never did catch them. They ran off. But yeah, I do that willingly. Like there's no fear in me when I'm in that role. It's like, no, this is part of what I am when I'm holding my masculine frame, is I'm a disciplined monster. And so part of me being deeply in my masculine is to recognise my potential for malevolence and mayhem and to train my body so I'm capable of, if I ever need to, of dishing that out, but only in the right way at the right time for the right reason. And so I think a lot of men have that monster in them, but they haven't got it disciplined.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also the conversation, which it fires me up every time, but there's that conversation now around like the toxic masculine, and so basically any man who does have that in them is immediately put into the toxic masculine box. And so I think it sort of tends to push men away from, really being strong around that.
Yeah, that's those two words shouldn't go together. Certain two words shouldn't go together.
Yeah.
Political correctness, those two words shouldn't be in the same sentence. Military intelligence, toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
What's toxic about masculinity? Nothing.
I think it's one of the most beautiful things in the world.
And femininity is the other most beautiful thing in the world. You can have toxic behaviour, and that can show up in women or men.
Yeah.
So this whole phrase of toxic masculinity, we just need to dump it.
Yeah.
It's misinformation. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
Whoever dreamt that up is in some sort of victim mindset and wants to point the finger at the masculine when not wanting to take responsibility for the shadow side of the feminine. So I don't relate to anything in the way of toxic masculinity. Masculinity is not toxic. The more masculine I am, the less toxic I am.
Absolutely.
And these men who have an untrained monster, an undisciplined monster, they're not toxic masculine. They're just not in their masculine because they haven't done the work. They haven't confronted the demon within. This is the real work that men have to do. They have to confront themselves. And when they can do that, they can become, empowered in their masculinity. And, the archetype for that is like a samurai. So he's got a sword, he's got the potential for malevolence, but he has the discipline to keep it in the sheath. Yeah. And that's how I feel. I know I've got potential for malevolence, but it's only there to protect, not to wreak havoc on. So these men who, the minority, the small minority of men who are involved in domestic violence, it's not the majority, and this is a terrible thing, more misinformation. So those men, they do have the capacity for violence and mayhem in them, but they've not disciplined themselves and they've not done the work. And whether it's through alcohol or drugs or whatever, they become disinhibited and their monster comes out and then they unleash that on their partner or their children or whatever. And they're just men who haven't confronted their shadow. And so maybe that's something, because I've done that work, that my masculinity is the kind of masculinity that's going to dovetail into your softness and surrendered receptiveness of femininity, where you get to feel safe and soften, and then and that just brings me deeper into my masculine frame, which then makes you feel more safe and protected, and you drop deeper into your feminine. And that polarity seems to work really well. It definitely does for us.
Yeah. I think I almost witnessed you have these realizations, because a lot of it actually came up because of COVID, like during the COVID time. And the threat that was there, we didn't really know exactly how far, the authorities were going to go. And I remember you just saying, like, I will fight to the death, like to protect yourself and me in terms of, undertaking, certain medical experiments. And so I really witnessed that, and because I remember you having conversations, but saying to me, like, I never used to believe that there was evil in the world. And then we're suddenly watching, like, everything that's going on in the world, and we're like, oh, like, there is some serious malevolence out there.
Yeah, I'd already, it was during my time doing psychedelics that I became aware of evil. And that's the whole function of psychedelics. That's the primary thing I think psychedelics do for humanity, is they rip the mask off. They take the persona down. And gone is your squeaky clean ego persona, and behind it's all the things about you that you can't face, which is your shadow, which is your monster. And so I'd already encountered the malevolence in me that's in all of mankind, and started to do the work. But then when COVID rolled around, and they were talking about forced vaccination.
There was conversations going
around,
on.
I think in Germany and Austria were considering it.
Yeah. And but even like people in the media were saying, like, people who aren't vaccinated shouldn't get this and that, and they should be demonized.
There was certainly, they were mandating it and all the rest of it. For me, I drew the line at, well, if they're going to show up at my door, a nurse holding a syringe and a police officer, and they're going to force something on me that I don't want, I'm not down for that. Like, I believe in body autonomy and consent and freedom of choice and all that. And so I thought to myself, if it comes to that, how am I going to manage that? Am I going to roll over? and take this thing that I don't want and allow these people to, like, that's violence. You know, to penetrate my boundary without my consent is the definition of violence.
Yeah.
So if someone's going to come at me with violence, the earlier version of me would have rolled over and accepted. And so I had the image of what do I do in the case of that? And I just saw the baseball bat. I thought, no, I'm not going to roll over. I'm going to stand up for and protect my body autonomy, this vessel that I live in. The state, the government, the health department, the chief health officers, the bureaucrats, no other man has the right to dictate my body autonomy or sovereignty. And I saw that very clearly. And so I was willing to make a stand for myself and for you too, if you want to be included on that. And I would happily defend myself. I would certainly give a warning. I'd say, look, if you come near me with that thing, I'm going to fight. And I even had to imagine me going to the extent if that officer's got a gun, am I willing to die to protect my autonomy? And I saw that I was. Yep. And I saw that as a noble death. And so I really got to see this part of me that I'd never seen before, because I was such a peace-loving pacifist and had no potential or capacity for violence. That violence is fine when it's there to protect yourself against something monstrous. Your monster comes out to protect you against a monster. Now, someone else might see that the people who wanting to force vaccines on you is not monsters, but that's how I saw it at the time. I still see it that way. I believe we have a right to bodily autonomy, and that's the masculine part of me, and I think that makes you feel safe.
Absolutely, yeah, and it makes me feel very comfortable and confident that you can protect our child, and really stand up and advocate for our child, particularly obviously in their medical needs and things like that. So
yeah, sure.
That just I don't know if I'd ever really felt like that before. And I'm not saying that my previous partners weren't capable of that, but I guess we never really spoke about it. But you and I, we did talk about these sorts of things. And so, when it did come time to us discussing having a family, we were just so on the same page of how we wanted to raise our child. And I knew that you had our child's back 100%. I never doubted that. I don't doubt that at all.
Yeah, I matured quite late, and I just want to send an apology out to my previous partners, because I think the earlier version of me wasn't able to provide protection, safety and security to my partners, because I was still underdeveloped, hadn't done shadow work, and hadn't confronted.
You were still deeply mature, but you were also immature in other ways.
I mean, because I just thought about myself. I wasn't thinking about commitment.
Yeah.
I was a bit of a party animal, There's lots of ways in which a guy can show to a woman that he can't provide safety and protection. Yeah. And if that's that he's, got addictions to alcohol or whatever, if he just thinks about himself, if he can't manage his finances, if he runs away every time there's an argument or a fight. So there's plenty of ways in which I was showing up that I wasn't really... I don't think women were looking at me, oh, yeah, this guy's got my back. It's like this guy's going to run at the first, threat. And so, as a late maturer, I developed all those attributes that were able to provide that. So, yeah, a bit of an apology out there to my previous partners for developing late in life. But, yeah, I'm really pleased. Better to develop late than never. Yeah. So here we are, and we're going to be a family in about a month's time, and I'm excited and entering a new phase of my life, and excited and pleased to be doing it with you. And the other thing that's quite exquisite and comforting about our relationship is that we're fully aligned on all the things around child rearing.
Yeah.
And that's been a real pleasant discovery.
Yeah.
I know that one of the sources of conflict in relationships is how the children are raised. And if there's a lot of differences there, it can cause a lot of conflict and can cause relationships to break down. I think the two biggest threats to relationships are arguments over finances and arguments over how to raise the kids. And we seem to have both those sorted out.
Yeah, definitely. We'd prefer to argue about the colour of towels.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, we had very deep, intimate conversations around going into parenthood for I would say like almost 9 months or so before we actually committed to doing it. Like it was like incredibly conscious us going into parenthood. And whilst we did talk about it a lot and we had a lot of conversations almost on a weekly basis, every time like we realized that we were just like more and more like aligned on everything. And it's, you know, it's fairly likely that the way that we choose to parent is certainly not the norm or the mainstream. And when I do talk about, I mentioned to some people around some of the things that we're doing or that we plan to do, you know, I generally get some negativity or some like, oh yeah, oh we'll see how that works,
Sure.
you know, and it's not always particularly supportive.
Yes.
But like you said, like the other day we had our dear friend staying, and when she acknowledged, you know, the way that we communicated, we were also telling her about these ways that we wanted to raise our child, and she was just blown away and so encouraging of us, you know, because she also sees, you know, people coming to her with like bringing all their childhood baggage into the relationships and then into therapy with their partners and going to her. So she could have actually really recognized and acknowledged to us that, oh, the way you guys are doing this is, you know, quite open-minded, and you're going to be raising a really confident child just by the things that we're doing. But it definitely is not, I definitely would not think that it's the mainstream or the norm to do these things, certainly given the attitude that I get from a lot of people. Yeah. And even you've received a little bit of that.
I was at the gym and talking to a guy there. He's got 12 children, which, you know, had that raised my eyebrows when he told me that, because I don't even have one yet. And so I was having some conversations with him about that. And I was going to have him on the podcast and talk about, you know, what's it like to be the father of 12 kids. And then he asked me how we were going with you know, the birth coming up. And I told him we were having a home birth. And he shot that down. He said, "Are you crazy? So many risks involved with that. You've got no right to put your partner and your baby at risk like that. You shouldn't be you want to think about that and go and do it at the hospital and everything." And I just kind of let him go on. I just thought, oh, okay, this guy obviously has a lot of fear around things. Maybe he's got good reason for that. I think he said something about with their 11th child that there was a complication, and that being in the hospital was the right place to be. And so, but I think he was kind of putting that on our experience. Yeah. And I didn't want to let that into our experience. I think for us, we feel safer doing it at home. And so we'll do it at home with a midwife and backup.
Well, considering also I have a deep fear of hospitals, and I become extremely anxious the minute that I...
Yeah, because so that's not going to work for you.
It's definitely not going to work for me. It's going to make me
You're going to feel safer and more comfortable at home. So it makes sense to have it at home. We're going to have a midwife. We're going to have backup. And so we're being responsible.
Yeah. And plus you're nursing. I mean, originally going in, I was just like, we can just do this on our own. I'm totally confident. You know, you're a nurse, and you just went along with, you're like, whatever makes you feel more comfortable. Initially. But then I kept hearing like these little things that you would say around like, yeah, but I don't want to be your nurse. I want to be Papa. I want to be your support person. And I did I heard that. I heard, even though you weren't directly sort of saying, hey, I want us to have a midwife or whatever. I did hear that, and I was like, would that make you feel more like you're actually able to do the roles that you want to do if we had a midwife there? And so then 2 days later we had a midwife because, I like you were saying, like, I respect your decision, but I also respect yours and what makes you feel most comfortable and confident. And but I was just going off like, you're a nurse, you've seen births before, you will be fine, but certainly having a midwife and building that rapport with her has been I totally feel like we're making that we made the right decision.
Yeah, you've been able to hear my needs, and I've been able to hear your needs, and then we've been able to negotiate from each of our positions to create solutions that work for both of us. And so that's one thing that we also have that works in our relationship, is that if there is a conflict, we're able to resolve it amicably and quite quickly by just being able to listen and hear the other person's needs, where some people struggle when there's a conflict. And I think what goes on there, and I teach this in conflict resolution when I'm working with couples, is that usually if there's a conflict and one person wants something one way and the other person wants it another way, they get stuck and they think that there's only two ways, and so they're going to fight and defend for their way, and then they're going to become righteous and want to dominate the other person, when really the solution quite often is neither. It's like some other possibility, but because you're so fixated on your way as being the right way, and you enter into this fight, into this combat with your partner. And so there's a whole process of how you can resolve conflicts. We've not needed to go there because we just do it naturally. So yeah, being able to resolve conflicts in a peaceful way is definitely a hallmark of a good relationship. Being able to handle confrontation, to be able to communicate. What are some other tips do you think that?
The other one, and it actually came up over the weekend, was no secrets. And it was funny. I think it was on Saturday night. We had a friend staying, and called. Well, I think we'd had a conversation with her around how that's one of the things that we will teach our child, is to not have secrets in our family.
Yeah.
And then maybe 10 minutes later, you call me outside and you're like, oh, I need to tell you something, I've got a secret. I'm keeping a secret from you. But I'm doing that because I don't want to put instill fear in you. And it was getting late and I was tired, and I was like, I really appreciate the fact that you outed yourself. You're like, yep, been keeping a secret from you. And I said, look, I'm totally open to hearing this because you want to share it with me. I just said, tomorrow's a better day, because right now I am tired. I definitely, it was late, and I had it was about birth, and so yeah, I just knew that I needed to be in the right frame of mind to be able to hear that, so that fear, the thing that the reason why you were keeping it from me, wasn't going to come up.
Yeah.
And so again, it was just one of those times where I was like, I hear you. Thank you for outing yourself. Let's talk about this tomorrow. And then next morning over breakfast, you were like, hey, can I share this with you? And I was like, yep, open to hearing it. And I could hear what it was. And
that's a good tip you're pointing to there. If you have to have an important conversation, don't do it when one or either party is stressed or tired or unwell. And we've learnt to do that in our relationship. And if there's an important conversation to be had, wait for the right time, and that's less likely to deteriorate into an argument or something.
Yeah.
We've got to a point where it's almost like we don't really have arguments.
No.
We have conversations and we negotiate things, but arguments have become a thing of the past.
Yeah, definitely. definitely, yeah. But I definitely do think that secret keeping in a family is, or in a relationship is.
Yeah, I believe it's our secrets that keep us sick.
Yeah.
And so I have a commitment not to having any secrets from you, and vice versa. And the other thing that makes is that really sets up for a deep level of trust. And like one of the things I've liked about you from day dot is you're the most honest and transparent person I've ever met. You don't hide things, you don't keep things secret. You take accountability. And so I've learnt to trust you, and that's been a real hallmark of our relationship. And then I've been able to show up as more trustworthy by looking for where, I'm not being completely honest, or where I'm not being completely transparent or accountable. And so you've modelled that from day one. And so some of the things I've learnt from you is to show up as that way.
That's really interesting, because I actually think that it's me being in this relationship that we've had that has allowed me to be more open and honest. So like I feel like being with you and witnessing how honest you are, because you'll own up to everything, anything and everything, and have done for a long time. Like you've got stories from many years ago where you're like, yep, I owned up to this, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that you would. And so that's like you've modelled to me how to be more honest. And I know recently there was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to see a practitioner, and I was like, oh, pretty pricey. And you were like, oh, how much? And you're like, sort of shouting out numbers. I was like, no. And then you're like, 250? I was like, yeah. And then I was like literally 2 seconds later, I was like, I am lying. Like, just be open, just be honest, And so I was like, actually, no, it was like 450 or whatever it was, And you were like, oh, okay, but you didn't get upset about that? The fact that like literally 2 seconds before that I was like, yeah, it was 200. Yeah, that's how much it was. And so you just, because I owned up immediately, because I was like, I can't live with myself.
Oh, right. I think we do that for each other. We raise the bar in terms of what's possible with honesty and transparency and accountability and loyalty.
Yep. Yeah, the first thing I was like, why am I not telling him the truth about that? It's ridiculous,
Yeah, secrets keep us sick.
Yeah.
And interestingly, so we have an agreement with that, and I got this from a dear friend of mine, with our child, that we're not going to teach our child to have secrets. Yeah. And I don't know whether this is a well understood thing or not, but I certainly liked the sound of it when it was explained to me. My dear friend, who's a very protective, masculine man, he had this conversation with me when I saw him. His daughter come home and was talking about some secrets that her and her friend had. And he said, we don't do secrets in our family. You need to share what this secret is. And so then the daughter shared the secret. And then I pulled my friend aside and I was like, what's that all about? Like, what's this no secrets thing? And he said, no, we don't do secrets. I'm like, why is that? He goes, that's how the pedophiles get them.
Yep, the pedophiles and the groomers.
Yeah, they go, we just got this little secret between us. Don't tell mummy or daddy. I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. I never thought about that. Yeah. And so, maybe there's some truth in that.
Yeah, and I remember because that that was with she's your goddaughter.
Yes.
So that was many years ago. She's a teenager now.
Yeah.
I remember when you told me that, well before we were going to become parents ourselves, I really loved that, because that was, as someone who, as a very young child, was groomed by a male teacher, it was like, oh, like I've had that experience. Right. So to then be like I feel pretty confident that in our family, that's not. I mean, there were so many secrets in my family.
Yeah, same.
So to not do that in our own is so important to me. Because that's the last thing that I'd ever want to see happen to my child.
Yeah.
So if we can teach our child from a very young age that secrets are shared in our family and not kept. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, I agree. And that doesn't mean that we don't have a right to privacy.
Of course,
Totally different things.
Yep.
You definitely have a right to keep things private
Yep.
and to yourself, but that's different from keeping secrets. And
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we probably could wind it up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Unless there's anything else on your mind that you
I
want to
think
share?
that we've sort of gotten through certainly everything that I can think of right now. But
Yeah.
I think there are a few things that we do well in relationship.
I think we do a lot well.
Yeah. I mean, it used to make me laugh when we first got together that you were a relationship coach. And I knew that you were wonderful at it. And because I'd heard around that, you got, and I saw that you got great results with people. But certainly over the years, I've gone, oh, you've definitely gotten better since.
Absolutely. I've learnt more about relationship from you than I knew before.
Yeah.
That's true. I also used to give parental advice to people. People used to come to me for parental advice, and I'm still not a parent yet. I'm close.
Yeah.
But I was able to give good parental advice on occasions and get good results where people hadn't been able to find it elsewhere.
Yeah. I mean, you've had people come to you asking you to work with their teenagers, and you're like, that's not my my age group of people who I work with. You tend to work with, men in their 30s and 40s type thing who are, I guess in a sense, still boyish.
Yeah.
But there's parents coming to you saying, can you work with my teenager?
Yeah.
And which I think that you'd be absolutely brilliant at. But I guess you've shared with me, it's your lack of parenting.
I haven't parented a teenager yet. And I know it can be a tricky thing, so I don't want to put my hand up and say, I've got that when maybe I haven't.
Yeah, yeah. But, I mean, I definitely have faith in you to do that. But, yeah, it did used to make me it was amusing to me that you were a relationship coach, given your experience. And I was like, hold my beer. I'll really show you.
No, thank you. I'm very grateful for your generosity of, wanting that for me. You could see the holes in me, where my weakness and my biggest weakness is to give up. And I only really seen this in the last 4 or 5 years.
Because I've pointed it out to you on many occasions.
Yeah.
Slow learner.
Yeah, and then I've also discovered it, when I studied the social styles, being amiable.
Yeah.
My strength is that I'm very supportive, but my weakness is that when things get tough and stressful, I give up. And that's been me most of my life. I've given up on 2 degrees at university, right before the end. I gave up on a very successful business. I've given up on all my relationships. And then I discovered that, this is my biggest, Achilles heel. This is my weakness. And I don't need to work on my strengths. I need to work on my weaknesses. And so I made a commitment about 4 or 5 years ago that screw that. I'm not giving up on things from now on. And that's why I could commit to you. I'm not giving up on this relationship. I'm not giving up on my business and my mission.
You don't
I'm
run
not
away
giving
anymore.
up on myself. I don't run away anymore. So, yeah.
In fact, you've more so committed to staying when things get difficult. Not that they do so much anymore. It's weird, as we made that commitment to not bring any stress or arguments into, since I've been pregnant, how I've really been able to
honor that.
Mostly honor that. Yeah, there've been a couple of little things that but again we've been able to work through them
very quickly.
Very quickly. But I think it's just proven to me, and again, we're new to this, we're going into this parenting thing, I guess blind because we've never done it before. But I think it's given me a pretty solid belief that we can continue to do that.
Yes.
And to not bring that into the home. And
I've got this philosophy, I guess you'd call it, that I think it's better to honour commitments and agreements over feelings. Yeah. And I kind of live by that most of the time, although sometimes my feelings can sabotage me. And so if we've been, and we made an agreement not to have arguments while you were pregnant because we didn't want stress on the baby, and we've managed to keep that agreement. Funny that. Just by making the agreement shows that you can do it. Whereas if we didn't have that agreement, we might honour our feelings. So if we're annoyed or pissed off or frustrated or not feeling heard, we might allow ourselves to go into an argument.
Yeah. And like we said earlier, like there has been a time, but we've been able to navigate that really well, so I think that we can continue to do that.
I just thought of another topic that we could touch on.
Okay.
So for most of my life, I didn't see the possibility of commitment in relationship or family or children based on what I witnessed as a child. And so I was never a no for children, but I was never a yes. I was always on the fence. And if people asked me, how do you feel about kids? I'm like, well, I'm not a yes and I'm not a no. So I was keeping it open. And then when we met, you were more of a no to children. And so I think I became a yes when you became a yes.
Yeah.
So do you want to share a little bit about how did you go from being a no to becoming a yes? Because that's quite a big step.
It's a very big step. I think I may have touched on it
in the previous
one that we've done together. But yeah, it really, what changed my mind was actually my former partner passed away unexpectedly in August of 2022, and that just completely shook the foundation of my life, really. I was in deep grief for a very long period of time. But I think I did grief really well, to be honest. And in that, in my healing journey, I did do some medicine work with a very trusted friend of mine. And I think I recognized in that time that I needed to do some work on that mother wound. But it was only through the loss of him. I'd been doing this work on my mother wound for freaking years prior, probably since I was about 16. But it really wasn't until that, his death, that I recognized, I was like, we're losing so many souls. This soul just suddenly left, well before his time.
Yep.
And I felt that there was this kind of need in me to bring a soul into the world and to also embark on a journey that now he's missing out on, so parenthood.
Okay. And
so when I did this medicine work with this dear friend of mine, I remember coming out of that session, I was completely not in my body, even though it was body somatic work that we were doing. I completely checked out in that session. And when I came, after the session that night, I was sitting on the couch and I remember talking to you, and I was so embarrassed, and I felt so much shame for even saying these words. But again, we pretty much tell each other everything. And so I was sitting on the couch and I was like, I think that I need to become a parent. I think I want to be a mother. And even as I uttered those words, I was like, what the fuck? This is unexpected, but it really came out to me in that session. And I didn't know how you were going to take it, because I know that in the past you had said to me that potentially if I changed my mind, that it might mean that I have to, that's kind of the end of the relationship, because, that's
one possibility.
Yeah. But the way that you heard and received that was probably actually exactly what I needed. you know. And I know that you then said to me later on that it was like, you know, something to do with Simon Sinek and what he said. Can you?
Yeah, you can have whatever you want in life as long as you don't get in the way of someone else having what they want. So I wanted to be with you.
Yeah.
You wanted a baby. So therefore, if I want to be with you, then you have the baby because you get what you want and I get what I want. As it turns out, we all get what we want.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
So that definitely helped me navigate that.
Yeah, you didn't realise how much you wanted to be
now
papa
I'm all down for it.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Likewise with you.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, this journey we're on now is, you know, we're very fortunate because I think we would have missed out.
Yeah.
Had we not chosen this.
Absolutely. It has already changed me as a person.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And myself,
Yeah. And like there's literally I can't think of anything else that would have changed me, like, or helped me become this new person I'm becoming. You know, many years ago I had dogs and cats and they were my children. I told everyone that my children, and I used to get the looks from parents being like, it's nothing like it.
There's this crazy notion going around at the moment that it's selfish to want to have children in today's world. And I think there's a movement called the anti-natalists who are actually against, you know, humans birthing humans. Yeah. They've got a whole philosophy around it. And so it's actually quite an anti-humanist philosophy because if we don't have children, that'll be the end of the human race. And so these people are actually against the human race, which is quite strange.
God.
But also, well,
there's a lot of fear-mongering around, you know, the world's overpopulated and things like that. And, I mean, I tend to err on the side of, you know, population decline is probably our biggest...
More of a threat,
you know. So, yeah, and a lot of these things, like, I mean, I was one of these people who was like, you know, I don't need children and I'm totally happy the way that I am. But
you weren't.
But I wasn't. And I can see that looking back and like in hindsight, I can be like, I mean, I struggle, and I know that you can back me up on this one. Like, I never knew what I wanted to do.
Correct.
I had all these passions, and I mean, my passions tend to be on the fringe side of things. Yeah. And
you worked in the cannabis industry.
Yeah. And had done for many years, and is the whole reason why I went to America. That's why I felt like my future was America, was because they actually have an industry that I really love and really passionate about, and that's really well informed and based in science. And I love that. And then I come back here and we are not that still now. And so, yeah, I had all these passions and just nowhere to really, I never really knew where to go with them or what to do. I never felt fully, even when I worked in them, even when I was in America and I worked in the industry and I loved what I did, but I still never felt fulfilled. Yeah. I still felt like there was something that just wasn't, I felt frustrated about it all the time.
Yeah, a lot of frustration.
Yeah, and I recognize now that that's a big part of why my first two relationships didn't work, is because both of those men could see, you are not fulfilled. There's like, you need to go out into the world. You need to go and experience things because you're not happy. And I mean, I was like, no, I love being with you. Like, you're my partner. Like, don't let me go. I mean, I'm forever grateful that they did. But I mean, it broke my heart that's what they recognized, was that I was not fulfilled. Yeah. And honestly, the minute that I became a full yes to becoming a parent, it's like all of that went.
It was definitely a feature of our relationship for the first 3 years that you had debilitating frustration. It was a source of some trouble between us, and because I had my mission and my focus and my purpose, and you'd see me leaving home in the morning, going off to do my thing, and you'd be just like frustrated because you had a few things that you were into.
Oh yeah, I
but you were
still worked.
but you were still deeply dissatisfied.
Yeah.
Like, what's my purpose? What's my mission? What's my purpose? And
every time I felt like I was on mission and on purpose, nothing satisfied me.
And so becoming a mum's, that's disappeared.
Yeah, totally has disappeared. Yeah, and I think that's also where that recognition and acknowledgement of what my greatest need is. I think it comes back to then that need of that safety, security, protection, because I've discovered my mission is becoming a parent and raising a child, which means that I don't have to, that I'm not going to be, my primary source of income. Like I'm not going to be, before that, it was always like I just took care of myself.
Right.
Even when I was in a relationship, it was like I still worked full time, made money.
You learned that probably
from
your mother, because your mother was a single mother who had to work in order to raise her two daughters.
Yeah.
And so
I was like, I can do anything. I'm Miss Independent.
I'm gonna be independent.
Yeah. I take care of my own safety and protection and that's all. Yeah. That's where I can soften and defer to you as the masculine to take care of that, because I now have my my mission all sorted.
And I defer to you to moderate our relationship, and you've done a great job of it.
Yeah. Yep.
Keep it up.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, darling.
Thank you.
How's it been for you and Pepe during the...
Lots of movement.
Okay.
I'm fairly convinced that we are going to have a Leo. Okay. Every time that I am, I was speaking at a conference back in May when I was 6 months pregnant, and I remember each time I was on stage that day, like baby just went crazy inside of me, so it's like, I think we're definitely gonna have a Leo who just is gonna love to shine and love to be on stage.
If it comes on the due date, it'll be a Leo for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, great. Thank you, love. It's been exquisite.
Thank you.
All right.